So we were all taken aback, caught off guard by Anthony Joshua's Kanye West-style meltdown in the ring, following his second defeat to Alexander Usyk. After the decision was read, AJ stormed out without being interviewed. In fact, apparently he threw the belts. He snatched the belts off someone and threw them out the ring. I'm not sure whether that happened before he stormed out or when he came back into the ring. Maybe one of you guys can tell me in the comments. In any event, he stormed out the ring and he then got into an argument with somebody in the crowd. Looked like he was going to give them a right-hander. And then I don't know if somebody told him something or what, but he came back into the ring, stormed back in just the way it stormed out. Perhaps he had a contractual obligation to do a post-fight interview in the event that he hadn't been knocked out or badly hurt. Whatever the case may be, he got back in the ring. He grabbed the microphone. In fact, he had some kind of confrontation with Usyk first. Then he grabbed the microphone and he went on this embarrassing, cringeworthy rant. Right? Now, during my live commentary, I was saying, somebody call the security. Like get the microphone off this guy. He's embarrassing himself. But all jokes aside, there's people reacting very negatively to what AJ did. They're saying that he's shown his true colors, that he's a terrible sportsman, that he's a narcissist because of this outburst. You know, for me, it's not really that deep. Anthony Joshua is a fighter. He obviously trained very hard. He's been dealing with a tremendous amount of pressure his whole career, and I'll come on to that a little bit later on. He's heard all the naysayers because that's what he started talking about in that rant, right? He started talking about all the naysayers. And this is a guy who is an alpha male. This is a guy who's a fighter. You can't expect fighters to think and behave in the way that normal people do. See, it's only Joe Public who've never laced up a pair of gloves, who are beta males and, you know, whatever. They don't understand how alpha males and fighters think. You know what I mean? So they completely don't get the outburst from AJ. I get the outburst. The issue I had is that I think a member of his team should have taken that mic off him, or the security or somebody, to save him from embarrassing himself and from making the situation worse. Because AJ's clearly frustrated by all the naysayers and the doubters and the detractors, but he's now given them even more fuel. Do you know what I mean? He's now made himself into a meme with that outburst. Also, another issue I had was that he didn't show that type of passion in the ring. He showed more passion in the first fight, yes, but he allowed Usyk far too much space to box. He didn't apply anywhere near enough pressure. And it isn't just a matter of throwing more punches. You don't even need to throw more punches. Just get your feet closer. Put the guy under more pressure. Force him to move more than he wants to move. AJ made certain improvements in this fight, particularly defensively, and I'll talk about that in a separate video. But as I say, one of the things that he didn't do here is he didn't show that kind of passion that he did in the post-fight rant in the ring, particularly earlier on during the fight. That's what he needed. Not reckless abandon, but definitely needed to get his feet closer to Usyk more often and lean on the guy. Do you know what I mean? Like, actually, I'm not saying excessively, but make your presence felt more than he actually did. So that was the issue I had with it. Is not what he said or the fact that he had an outburst or the fact that he felt the way that he felt. He's a fighter, okay? As far as the whole, he's a narcissist. Well, people talk stuff about narcissism and they don't really understand what narcissism is. Narcissism is really like a scale, right? Not every narcissist is equally narcissistic. And in fact, you look into the work of Freud and what have you, he talked about healthy levels of narcissism. And if you're talking about elite level fighters, all of them have got colossal egos. All of them, I'm sure, or the vast majority of them, could be classified, I'm sure, as narcissists. Perhaps not extreme or malignant narcissists. Again, narcissism is a scale. But narcissistic compared to the average person, yes. It's just that certain fighters mask it. Certain fighters understand how to play the game. They keep it under wraps. That's why this whole thing about AJ being humble, stay humble. Did any of you really believe that? I feel sorry for the people who did. You can't be humble and have a small ego and be competing and winning at the elite level in boxing. That's impossible. You have to think that you're the mutt's nuts, at least with regards to your fighting ability, to your fighting prowess as a man. You have to have a colossal ego, right? But again, you think Usyk doesn't have a colossal ego? Of course he does. But he doesn't speak English for one, so you don't really know how he really feels. And for two, a lot of these guys, particularly the Eastern Europeans, they know how to, they understand decorum, They understand that if you come out and really express how you feel about yourself to the public, that the public are not going to take very kindly to it. So they understand how to play the game. And many other fighters understand how to play the game. But inside, you have to have a colossal ego. That's where you get your confidence from. That's where you get your competitive spirit from. So I don't have an issue with AJ having a huge ego. He's supposed to, right? To say it's the fact that he didn't apply that in the ring and the fact that his team allowed him to embarrass himself in that way. Now, I want to talk a little bit about where AJ goes from here if he continues boxing. Of course, there are some people saying that he should retire. Some people saying that they think he will retire. Johnny Nelson said he thinks AJ will retire if he lost to Usyk again. Well, we'll see now. In terms of the people who say that AJ should retire, I don't know why. Why do you think AJ should retire exactly? Like, when you have a golden era in any division, but let's just take the heavyweight division, it's made up of a cast of characters. The golden age in the 1970s wasn't just Muhammad Ali. It was all of his rivals. Ali was the standout guy because ultimately he beat everybody. But without the supporting cast, then it wouldn't have made such a great movie. If you follow the metaphor, right? The analogy. It wouldn't have made such a compelling movie. It's because you have all these characters in there. And so AJ, I know he's not the most charismatic person, right? Although when he went full heel, and by the way, I like a good heel turn, but AJ's heel turn was just more cringe than anything. I preferred Golovkin's heel turn. In any event, AJ is part of that mix. He's one of the characters in the heavyweight division now. He's got 3 losses. He's avenged, He's got 3 losses, 1 to Ruiz, 2 to Usyk. He's avenged 1 of them, all right? And the other 2 to the same man he hasn't avenged. Usyk is a fantastic fighter. This guy was undisputed cruiserweight champion, moved up to heavyweight, beat AJ. Why on earth should AJ retire? You look at the heavyweight division in the 70s, look at the guys who've taken a couple of losses. Should they have retired? Look at what they went on to accomplish after their losses. Look at, a man like Buster Douglas, for example. He lost several times before he beat Mike Tyson. Look at, Oliver McCall. He lost several times before he beat Lennox Lewis. Look at Hasim Rahman. What he did. Look at, on and on it goes. Lots of fighters lose and then they come back and become better. And from a fan perspective, it's entertaining watching these guys, isn't it? It entertains me. So I don't see why a guy like AJ, who didn't get knocked out, he didn't get badly beaten up by Usyk. So from the perspective of a boxing fan, I hope he continues. Just like I hope Deontay Wilder continues. We know he's fighting Hellenius now. These guys have still got plenty left to give, plenty of entertainment to provide. So what's all this retirement talk about? I guess it's people who don't like AJ for whatever reason. And I understand that there are going to be people that you don't like in terms of their personality, but I try and put that to one side and just look at what they do in the ring. Like Deontay Wilder, he comes across as just a complete idiot as a person. But in the ring, he is tremendously entertaining. So I want to see Wilder carry on. I don't want to see him stop. There are a lot of other people out there who, after Wilder got beat by Fury for the third time in most people's eyes, they were saying, Wilder needs to retire and leave the heavyweight division. No. I never wanted him to retire. I always wanted him to continue because there are so many other great fights that he can be involved in. And I feel the same way about AJ. I want him to continue. Now, let's rewind all the way back to the start of AJ's career. The very early videos that I was doing about AJ. What was I saying? I was saying that I'm unsure how well AJ is going to develop under the bright lights because it's not the norm for a fighter turning pro to be doing so under, with all this attention on him. Normally they get to build their resume in a more low-key fashion, or learn the trade, should I say, early on in their careers in a more low-key fashion. And then once they've rounded out their skills and developed themselves enough, then they step up to world level. AJ was rushed. And I was always impressed by how well he dealt with the pressure, because most fighters are going to crack before AJ did when the pressure is that intense and they're doing stadium fights before they're even 20-0, they're doing stadium fights in front of 80,000 people. And he didn't have, hundreds of amateur fights like Usyk or anything like that. So to have held it together for as long as he did, I always felt that was very impressive. But at the same time, as his championship run developed, I started seeing areas where he was not improving. And this is when I started saying that he needs to fire Robert McCracken. This was long before the loss to Ruiz. The videos are still up. You guys know, if you're long-time subscribers, that what I'm saying is facts. I was saying for the longest, he needs to get rid of McCracken because there are areas of his game that are not improving and they need to improve. Now, when he lost to Andy Ruiz the first time, what did I say? I said that AJ should not take the immediate rematch. And it's not because I didn't think he could beat Ruiz, because I always said that he does have the skills and the dimensions to beat Andy Ruiz. I wasn't sure about his mindset and whether he'd be able to hold it together for the 12 rounds and his stamina and all that, but the skills and the ability, I always felt he had what was necessary to beat Ruiz in a rematch if he, boxed safety first, as he ended up doing. The reason I didn't want him to take the rematch is because he's going to be right back under the spotlight, under the pressure that comes with championship level boxing. And because he's got several belts, he can't have nice, easy tune-ups and learning fights, basically. He can't do any of that. He's going to be right back in there with, top fighters, elite fighters, tough mandatories again. And under those conditions, it's much more difficult for a guy to develop and learn. It's like every fight is going to be a life and death struggle. And that is not how you develop a fighter. So I felt that AJ needed to, forget about the Ruiz rematch, drop down, have the learning fights that he didn't have earlier on in his career, the development fights, and then step back up to championship level when he's become a more rounded fighter. But, people didn't want to hear that. The AJ fans didn't want to hear it. I guess AJ and Eddie Hearn didn't want to hear it either. He continued. A couple fights later, he lost. And that's what I said would happen. I said, yeah, he might beat Andy Ruiz in a rematch, but he's going to lose quite soon again. Right? It's going to happen because he's not developing certain areas of his game. And you're not going to be able to, under that kind of pressure with constant mandatory, you're not going to be able to do it. So he loses to Usyk. And I said the same thing again. I don't think that AJ should take the immediate rematch. I think that he should have at least a couple fights in between with a new trainer. Again, get rid of McCracken, new trainer, new mentality, develop certain skills, and then try and have another crack at Usyk or whoever's champion at the time. So I've been very, very consistent with this. And where I'm going is this second loss to Alexander Usyk might be, from a fighter development perspective, exactly what Anthony Joshua needs. This might be the best thing that's ever happened to him. But it's a make or break scenario because it all depends on his mind. Obviously, he's very upset. He's devastated. Maybe he's going to fall out of love with boxing. I don't know. Him throwing the belts out of the ring, and Eddie Hearn said after the fight that AJ's become kind of skeptical or sour about the sanctioning bodies and whatever. Maybe that's through talking to Derek Chisora, who's a friend of his, right? Because Derek Chisora doesn't care for sanctioning bodies. Well, I don't know what's going on with that for now and how that may affect his future. But I think that I know that now he's going to go back to being a contender. There's no more rematches with Usyk. He needs those learning fights. He can get those learning fights now with the pressure off. You saw what the pressure has done to him. That's why he had the Kanye West style meltdown. When you are not a complete fighter, and AJ isn't, Usyk's a complete fighter. So he's fighting a guy back to back who is a complete fighter. Usyk, let me explain first the things I want to see in boxing. I have the same wish for every fighter. And that is that they make the most out of their ability, that they take the talent that they have to the absolute zenith, where there is nothing more they could do to improve themselves. That's what I want. And the reason I want that is for my entertainment. Because if you have a fighter who's physically talented and whatever, but he isn't making the most out of his potential because he isn't with the right trainer, or he isn't with the right manager, or he isn't with the right promoter, maybe he's not getting the right fights, perhaps he's not dedicated, or whatever the case may be. Maybe he's got some psychological issues. That means that, he's not providing me with the best entertainment that his potential could give me. You see what I'm saying? So as a boxing viewer, as a boxing consumer, I want every fighter to maximize their potential. I've always felt that Anthony Joshua isn't doing this. He hit a ceiling with Rob McCracken, but not his ceiling. That was McCracken's ceiling in terms of what McCracken could do with that particular fighter. AJ, I still believe, from a physical perspective, has got a ceiling beyond what we've seen so far. But in order to reach that ceiling, he needs development fights. All the pressure that comes with the championship stuff is too much. He needs to step down, have some, 4 or 5 development fights with a trainer, round yourself out as a fighter. Then you can step back up to championship level. And this time, maybe you'll be someone that can actually get the respect that he's been looking for all his career. Maybe even become undisputed one day. I don't know. But however far he does go, my point is he can be better than he is now, physically, in terms of his, should I say technically, tactically, he can be better than he is now. So I think that he should, whether it's Robert Garcia or some other trainer, stick with that trainer. Angel Fernandez can be, somebody else in the team, hold the spit bucket, whatever. No disrespect to Angel Fernandez, but I don't think he has the experience yet to be AJ's head coach. I didn't like seeing Fernandez in the ring as if he was the chief second rather than Robert Garcia. I didn't like seeing that. Now, sometimes the spit bucket guy or the cutsman is in the ring because you can only have 1 second in the ring at a time. But either way, it appeared as though Fernandez was the main guy. Robert Garcia was doing some talking here and there. I didn't like that. I think AJ just have one guy, and I think Robert Garcia might be the guy. The only thing I'm unsure about is the fact that in the post-fight press conference, and of course Robert Garcia said there was some clashes in the camp between him and AJ, but in the post-fight press conference, AJ said that he left it all in the gym, but he didn't leave it all in the ring. And I'm not sure how to take that. He might mean that he basically wore himself out in the gym and he didn't have that much to give in the ring. And maybe that's why he didn't fight as aggressively as I was saying he should, because perhaps he left it all in the gym. I don't know. Perhaps AJ will do an interview and expand more on that. But overtraining is a real thing. And when you've got a trainer like Robert Garcia, who isn't used to training heavyweights, he has trained some heavyweights in the past, but it's not the norm for him. Sometimes a guy who's not used to working with heavyweights doesn't realize that heavyweights can't do the same kind of things that smaller fighters can do. And if you've got an explosive fighter like AJ, see, generally speaking, this is a generalization. You have 2 types of fighters. You've got endurance fighters and you've got explosive fighters. It's like long distance runners versus sprinters. And you have middle distance runners as well. Let's say 800 meter runners or whatever. AJ is more like, a 200 meter runner. He's not a guy that's ever going to be able to throw a million punches in a fight. He's not a Joe Frazier. He's more of an explosive guy. And if you're not used to training explosive guys, you might think that this guy needs to be throwing the same kind of punches or the same number of punches as the volume punches that you've been training. Do you know what I mean? Maybe you've been used to training marathon runners and now all of a sudden you got a sprinter and you're trying to make the sprinter run marathons. It don't work. Yeah. So I don't know whether Garcia understands that. I'm not saying he doesn't. I'm just, thinking out loud here. I don't know whether he does or he doesn't. But if he understands that AJ is a sprinter and not a marathon runner, and he understands that heavyweights can't do the kind of things that welterweights or whatever can do, then I think he should stick with Robert Garcia. At the end of the day, Manny Stewart didn't train many heavyweights prior to training Lennox Lewis. He trained, I think, Darnell Nicholson, Oliver McCall, of course, and Evander Holyfield. I think Holyfield was Manny Stewart's first top-level heavyweight that he trained. And by then, Manny Stewart had been a professional boxing coach for what? Over 10 years? The Holyfield Bowl rematch was what? 92, 93? So he'd been a pro boxing coach for like 10 years or something. And Holyfield was the first championship-level heavyweight that he trained, and he won that fight. Holyfield lost the first Bowl fight soundly. Bowl beat him soundly. And Manny Stewart trained Holyfield the first time he trained a championship-level heavyweight to victory. So I don't necessarily think that Robert Garcia can't do a good job because he hasn't trained a championship-level heavyweight before. No, I think that there were improvements that AJ made, which again, I'll talk about in a separate video. But he needs to listen and he needs to not have a big team. Just Robert Garcia, and if not Garcia, then maybe one of these other trainers out there, who are experienced. Stick with them and forget about the Angel Fernandez. There's no disrespect to him. forget about the Angel for now, and maybe even go train in America, away from the pressure of the UK and the fans and the expectations and the trolls and all this type of stuff. Maybe go train in America, spar some of those PBC heavyweights. Yeah, I think that that's what he should do. I've often spoken about the period of Lennox Lewis's career where he was in the wilderness. And during that period where Lewis was in the wilderness, even though at the time he was frustrated because he wanted to fight for a title and there was lots of politics involved and he was being frozen out, it was a blessing in disguise. It gave Lewis the time to develop himself, to reinvent himself under Manny Stewart. You see, if Lewis had gone straight from that Oliver McCall defeat into fighting Riddick Bowe or Holyfield or Tyson was still in prison at the time, but, you know, just hypothetically speaking, he would have found it extremely difficult indeed. Right? And I'm saying he wouldn't have won those fights at that point. He needed time to recover mentally from what happened in that Oliver McCall fight. And he needed time to develop his skills, to get comfortable with Manny Stewart. So that time that he spent in the wilderness, in the desert, you know, like Moses, right? That was the making of him. Don't you see? So everybody who's been getting on me about AJ, you know, I've always said that AJ shouldn't take the immediate rematch with Ruiz and he shouldn't take the immediate rematch with Usyk. You've been missing the point all along. It's not because I hate AJ or anything like that or hate Matchroom. It's because I want to see every fighter make the absolute most of their ability. And I believe that that is how AJ needs to do it. That's how he can do it if he steps away from the championship level, the limelight, and has those learning fights, those developing fights. And I think that AJ potentially could be a lot more dangerous and a lot more formidable as an underdog, as somebody who's been written off. Even Muhammad Ali had his years in the wilderness, right? When he lost to Joe Frazier, he was in the wilderness for years before he eventually beat George Foreman. Now, I'm mentioning some of the greatest fighters of all time here. I'm not saying that AJ is going to go down in the same bracket as those guys at all. I don't know how good AJ can be. But as I keep telling you, in order for him to reach his potential, in my opinion, this is the process he needs to go through. This is the process that he's always needed to go through. And I've been saying this for how many years? Tyson Fury went through this process the right way, right? Before he reached championship level, he'd had all his trials and tribulations. He'd had those wars with McDermott. He'd had the knockdowns against Nevin Pikage. He'd been to America and fought Steve Cunningham where he got dropped and he had to get off the canvas. All of this stuff builds character. It builds experience. You can hone your skills. The Kevin Johnson fight, Tyson Fury came out and he just boxed beautifully for the whole fight. Just completely schooled the guy. Now, that prepared him to do something similar against Vladimir Klitschko. Don't you see? So when you take on somebody lesser than Klitschko, you can you can try those kind of tactics. You can develop those kind of tactics. You can work on those things in the ring so that, okay, that's a box ticked. I've now got that in my locker. I can pull that out of the bag, even at championship level once I get there. That's how you develop a fighter. AJ never had those experiences. He had one tough fight before he fought for the title, Dylan White. That's it. He has one tough fight, fights Charles Martin. Then he had a couple after that who were, I guess, ex-Wilder opponents in, Dominic Brazil was undefeated at the time. Molina was an ex-Wilder opponent. Then he's in there with Klitschko. So he had one tough fight before Klitschko. That's not enough. You know what I mean? Because if you don't count those early fights as a real championship level, fighting the likes of Brazil and Molina and Martin, from Klitschko on, it was real championship level. Yeah, from Klitschko on, you got Klitschko, you got Takam, you got Povetkin, you got Ruiz, you got Pulev, you got, Alexander Usyk, obviously. So from that point on, it was all tough fights. And he'd only had one tough fight before he got there. Not enough. Yeah, all these knockover jobs and knocking people out in a couple rounds, all these journeymen, that doesn't prepare you for the elite level. You can't develop your skills against people who are going to fall over so easily. Yeah. So you need that middle ground. AJ didn't he went from absolute cream puffs. Then there was a tough fight against Dylan White. And then, a couple other easy fights. Then bam, he's in at the highest level. And he's been struggling to stay afloat at the highest level the whole time. You know what I mean? They need to bring him back to the shallow end and work on his form. Yeah. Work on his ability. Because when you're in, it's almost like AJ has been in a kind of survival mode every time he fights, since Klitschko onwards, because he doesn't have time to think. These guys are trying to take his head off, and AJ hasn't developed his game enough to be able to deal with them as comfortably as a Usyk would deal with them, or a Tyson Fury would deal with them, etc. People who are complete fighters. You see what I'm saying? So anyway, that's my take on the rant, and that's my take on where I think AJ should go from here. I don't think he should retire. I think he's got plenty left to offer the sport. It's not like he's been getting knocked out back to back, right? I think there's more reason for Wilder to retire than AJ at this stage because he's been getting knocked out. AJ got stopped a few fights ago, but he came back, beat that guy, lost twice on points to Usyk, didn't get stopped in the second fight. So I think he should continue. I think he's got plenty more entertainment left in him if he chooses to carry on. And by the way, I'm not saying Wilder should retire. I think Wilder should continue as well. Just making the point that if you're going to call for somebody to retire, for me, it's when they're taking a lot of damage, like a Dylan White, where he keeps getting sparked out. I mean, it's not good, where his punch resistance appears to be really poor. AJ doesn't have a great chin, but from what I can see, his punch resistance is actually better than Dylan White's at this stage. Do you know what I mean? So there's much more reason in my head for AJ to continue than there is for Dylan White to continue. And obviously you're going to get these weirdos in the comments saying, you hate Dylan White. These weird people. I'm just being objective, folks. So I'll leave it there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about everything I've talked about in this video. The AJ cringe meltdown, the Kanye-esque vibes. He's a fighter at the end of the day. The ego's always going to be there. You can't be shocked about that. Oh my God, AJ's supposed to be humble. Like, did you really buy that? Like, come on. Anyway, chat to you guys next time. I'm out. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high-quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and is 100% censorship-free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.